It's 1965, and deep in the rugged mountains of northern Iraq, something is happening that no one expects. Kurdish fighters, isolated, outgunned, and fighting for survival, suddenly gain access to modern weapons, training, and intelligence. But here's the twist: it's all coming from Israel. Yes, Israel, hundreds of miles away, with no shared borders, no common language, and absolutely no public connection. This wasn't some open diplomatic maneuver. This was Mossad operating in the shadows. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one, pulling strings and building one of the most unlikely alliances in Middle Eastern history. What started as a plea for help from a desperate rebel group turned into a decade-long covert operation that rewrote the rules of regional power games. And it all happened behind the curtain of Cold War politics, oil rivalries, and the age-old curse of betrayal. Let's rewind. In the mid-60s, Iraq was flexing its military muscles and growing closer to Soviet powers. For Israel, this was bad news. Surrounded by hostile Arab states and constantly on edge, Tel Aviv knew it needed leverage. So Mossad crafted the periphery strategy, a blueprint to build secret TIs with non-Arab actors across the region. Iran, Turkey, Ethiopia, and yes, the Kurds. The goal? Undermine Arab unity and gain intelligence footholds wherever possible. On the other side, Kurdish leader Mustafa Barzani was leading a rebellion against Baghdad. For generations, the Kurds had been pushed aside, a massive ethnic group scattered across Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq, with no country of their own. Their hopes of independence had been repeatedly crushed, their people subjected to repression, massacres, and forced displacements. Their homeland? Mountainous terrain that offered safety, but also isolation. Barzani knew that tribal unity alone wouldn't cut it anymore. The Iraqi army was modernizing fast, and Kurdish fighters needed more than just Kalashnikovs and courage. So, he looked outward, and surprisingly, Israel answered the call. This was where it all kicked off. The Kurds, once dismissed as a tribal nuisance by Baghdad, were now a trained, armed resistance with access to high-level intelligence. Israel wasn't doing this out of friendship. They were gathering valuable intel on Iraq, draining its military resources, and gaining critical strategic insight that would later benefit them in conflicts like the Six-Day War. For almost a decade, this alliance flourished in the shadows. The Kurds got what they needed to resist Iraqi domination. Israel got eyes and ears inside enemy territory. Iran, meanwhile, used the situation to keep its neighbor weak and distracted. But as with all things built purely on strategic convenience, it couldn't last forever. In 1975, the rug was pulled. Iran and Iraq signed the Algiers Agreement, a surprise deal that resolved their border disputes. As part of the terms, Iran agreed to cut off all support to the Kurdish rebels. Just like that, the covert pipeline dried up. Israel, dependent on Iran to reach the Kurds, was forced to pull out. No more weapons. No more training. No more intelligence. The betrayal was brutal. Iraqi forces launched a ruthless offensive. Thousands of Kurdish civilians were displaced. Leaders like Barzani were exiled. The once hopeful resistance crumbled under the weight of abandonment. It was a crushing reminder of what happens when your allies are in it for themselves, not for your cause. This wasn't just a tactical failure. It was a humanitarian disaster. And yet, it's a textbook case of how the chessboard of geopolitics works. Israel had never promised long-term support. The Kurds had gambled on an alliance rooted in mutual need, not mutual loyalty. And when the regional winds shifted, they were left holding the bag. Still, the story didn't end there. Years passed. Saddam Hussein rose to power. The Iran-Iraq war dragged on. And once again, the Kurds found themselves at the center of shifting interests. When Iraq invaded Kuwait and the Gulf War erupted, the Kurds rose in rebellion again. And once again, they were crushed again. But behind the scenes, the connection with Israel was never fully severed. After the fall of Saddam in 2003, the power vacuum in Iraq reshaped the entire region. The Kurdish region in northern Iraq gained semi-autonomous status. And with that, old ties quietly rekindled. Israel, still interested in keeping tabs on Iran and countering regional threats like Turkey, found value in a friendly Kurdish region. Though no longer as dramatic as airdropping agents or smuggling weapons through mountain passes, the alliance evolved. Economic investments flowed in. Intelligence sharing resumed. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next. And you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Kurdish oil began flowing to Israel, despite Baghdad's objections. There were reports of Israeli advisors helping with security and defense training. It was never confirmed publicly, and it didn't need to be. In this part of the world, silence speaks volumes. Why does this matter today? Because the alliance, unlikely as it is, hasn't disappeared. It's adapted. Israel sees value in supporting Kurdish autonomy, especially as a counterweight to Iran and an increasingly hostile Turkey. The Kurds, meanwhile, continue to rely on external powers to survive in a hostile neighborhood. And even though the alliance is fragile, built more on interests than values, it persists. There's a shared understanding between these two unlikely players. Both have histories marked by exile, persecution, betrayal. Both have learned the hard way that survival often comes at the cost of trust. And both know that in a region where alliances shift overnight, today's enemy can become tomorrow's partner and vice versa. Of course, not everyone approves. Most regional powers still oppose any form of Kurdish independence. Turkey has its own deep-seated issues with Kurdish groups. Iran, while once a key intermediary, now suppresses its own Kurdish population. And Baghdad remains bitterly opposed to Kurdish oil deals with Israel. But none of that has stopped the quiet cooperation from continuing. Because at its core, this isn't about shared dreams of freedom or cultural kinship. It's about strategy, leverage, power. In a region defined by mistrust and realpolitik, even the most unexpected alliances make perfect sense. And maybe that's the lesson here. This story isn't about heroes and villains. It's about necessity. It's about how stateless peoples like the Kurds, caught between superpowers and hostile neighbors, navigate survival through fragile deals and fleeting partnerships. And it's about how states like Israel use covert channels and proxy relationships to shape their security landscape, often at great cost to those they quietly support. In the end, the Mossad-Kurdish alliance is both a success story and a cautionary tale. It worked until it didn't. It empowered and then it abandoned. And yet, in today's ever-changing Middle East, the bond remains quiet, complex, and still very much alive. If you're still here, you're probably as fascinated by the messy world of secret deals and shifting alliances as we are. So what do you think? Was this a smart strategic move by Israel, or a betrayal waiting to happen? And do the Kurds have any real allies, or just temporary patrons? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video if you want more untold stories from the shadows of global power. Because in this game, the truth is never as simple as it seems. Absolutely. Let's pick up right where we left off and continue unpacking the layers of this covert alliance. Because if you thought the betrayal in 1975 was the end, oh no, that was just the intermission. The Mossad-Kurdish connection wasn't some Cold War relic that faded into history. It morphed, evolved, and adapted much like the Kurds themselves. See, when Iran flipped in 1979 and became the Islamic Republic, things got even messier. Tehran went from secret Israeli partner to sworn enemy almost overnight. And that meant Mossad lost a crucial bridge to its Kurdish allies. But what's fascinating and honestly kind of wild is that even with Iran off the board, Israel didn't fully disengage. The logistics changed, the risks increased, but the intent? Still there. And why wouldn't it be? The Kurdish mountains hadn't gone anywhere. Their fighters hadn't stopped resisting. And Iraq was still a regional wildcard with too much oil and too little stability. From Israel's perspective, the Kurds were still the perfect pressure point. The thing is, the Kurds had learned a painful lesson. Alliances based on strategy alone come with an expiration date. So going forward, they started playing the game a little differently. Instead of trusting anyone too much, they spread their bets. And that included cautiously reopening channels with Israel. Discreetly, of course. The days of parachuting Mossad agents into the hills were over. Now, it was about intelligence leaks, economic TIs, and quiet diplomatic signals that never made the front page. Then came the early 2000s. After the US invaded Iraq in 2003 and Saddam fell, the entire power map of the region exploded. The Kurds carved out an autonomous region in the north, the Kurdistan Regional Government, or KURG, and suddenly had breathing room. Real political power. A military force in the form of the Peshmerga. And oil. Lots of oil. Guess who came knocking? Israel was one of the first to see the opportunity. With Iran expanding influence through Baghdad and Hezbollah growing in Lebanon, Tel Aviv needed new levers of control in the region. And the KURG. It was secular, relatively stable, and open for business. That's a rare combo in the neighborhood. By 2014, during the ISIS crisis, Kurdish fighters were once again on the front lines, and this time, they were seen as the only real defense standing between ISIS and full regional collapse. International support came pouring in. Western nations sent weapons, trainers, and aid. But behind the scenes, Israeli support quietly resumed. Reports surfaced about Israeli firms investing in Kurdish infrastructure. Israeli oil tankers were spotted receiving Kurdish crude despite Iraq calling it illegal. And once again, Israeli-Kurdish relations were quietly being rekindled in the shadow of chaos. What's striking here is the consistency of the pattern. Every time regional disorder hits a boiling point, the Israel-Kurd connection lights back up. Not out of sentiment, but because their strategic interests keep aligning. For Israel, a pro-Western Kurdish statelet near Iran's border is a gift. For the Kurds, Israeli support, even if unofficial, is a lifeline. Not ideal, but better than being completely alone. But let's not sugarcoat it. Even in its current form, this alliance is shaky. It's informal, it's unofficial, it's entirely deniable, and it has to be. If the Kurdish leadership were to publicly acknowledge Israeli support, it could trigger massive backlash from their Arab neighbors, Iran, Turkey, even internally. There are factions within Kurdish society that are deeply wary of too close ties with Israel. And yet, the cooperation continues. This is the paradox. The alliance thrives precisely because it stays in the shadows. The moment it becomes official, it falls apart. That's the curse of geopolitics in the Middle East. Some relationships can only survive in the dark. Let's take a second to appreciate the irony here. We're talking about two peoples, the Kurds and the Israelis, both of whom have lived through generations of persecution, displacement, and existential threats. Both fighting for survival in hostile environments. Both having to build their own statehood, often with little help and a lot of enemies. And yet, their connection has almost never been about shared ideals. It's been about cold, hard strategy. It's about staying alive, not making friends. The Kurds don't romanticize the Israeli partnership. They know it's transactional. They remember 1975. They've seen what happens when a powerful ally suddenly changes course. But at the same time, they know that having Mossad's attention even unofficially gives them leverage. And Israel has always played the long game. They don't need public declarations or embassy openings. They need intelligence, access, disruption. And the Kurdish region, with its proximity to Iran and ability to destabilize Iraq and Turkey, delivers that. Quietly, consistently. So where does that leave us now? As of today, the Kurdish-Israeli alliance remains one of the most enduring open secrets in the region. There are no flags being waved, no handshakes caught on camera, but the relationship is there, under the surface, pulsing through oil deals, intelligence briefings, and security training. And given how volatile the region is, it's likely to stay that way. But here's what makes this story more than just a fascinating spy novel plot. It's a living example of how survival, not ideology, drives geopolitics. It's about how unlikely players find each other when the rest of the world turns away. And it's about how betrayal doesn't always kill a relationship, sometimes it just changes the rules of engagement. The Kurds are still stateless, still surrounded, still fighting for autonomy, and yet, they've built one of the most sophisticated informal foreign policy strategies in the region by staying flexible, open to unconventional partnerships, and deeply aware of their own vulnerability. And Mossad, they're still doing what they've always done, looking for cracks in the enemy's armor, building influence in the margins, and turning forgotten groups into assets. Their playbook hasn't changed much, just the names and the borders. So the next time you hear about Kurdish oil hitting Israeli ports or rumors of Mossad training Peshmerga fighters, know this: it's not new. It's not surprising. It's just the continuation of a partnership forged in shadows, driven by necessity, and held together by the unspoken truth that in the Middle East, everyone's playing chess and no one ever really resigns. Let's dig even deeper, because there's one more twist in this story that really seals its place in the hall of geopolitical absurdity. After all the betrayals, covert operations, smuggled weapons, and secret deals, the Israel-Kurdish alliance still manages to exist in this bizarre in-between space. Not quite official, but not exactly hidden either. It's like a relationship where both sides pretend they're just friends, while quietly coordinating military logistics and energy exports behind closed doors. And nowhere is that more obvious than in how oil has become the new language of their cooperation. When Kurdish oil started showing up in Israeli ports, it wasn't some clerical mistake. These weren't stray barrels getting lost at sea. This was calculated. The Kurdistan regional government had been selling crude independently, in defiance of Baghdad, and a lot of that oil was ending up in Israeli hands. Why? Because Baghdad couldn't control it, because Israel needed it, and because both parties knew how to play under the table. They're about intelligence, and this is where the story gets even darker. For Israel, having access to Kurdish territory means having proximity to Iran. And if you know anything about Mossad's priorities, you know that Iran is always top of the list. The nuclear threat, the proxy wars, the regional influence, being able to operate even slightly closer to Tehran, even indirectly, that's invaluable. So it's not just about helping the Kurds survive. It's about using Kurdish territory as a forward outpost, a listening post, a launchpad for intelligence gathering. And the Kurds, despite their wariness, allow it. Because again, it's mutual, it's calculated. And at the end of the day, it's what keeps them on the radar of powerful players. But here's the thing. The Kurds also know they're being used. This isn't some naval alliance. This is survival politics. And when you've spent generations without a state, you learn quickly that idealism doesn't get you far. Leverage does. Relevance does. And having even a whisper of Israeli backing, no matter how unofficial, gives you both. Still, history looms large. The shadow of 1975 is always there. The memory of being abandoned when the deal between Iran and Iraq was signed, it doesn't go away. Kurdish leaders have said it publicly and privately. They remember who walked away. And yet, they keep walking back into the same kind of alliances. Not because they trust, but because they can't afford not to. And that, honestly, is the most haunting part of this entire story. Because when you strip away the spycraft and the strategy, what you're left with is a harsh geopolitical truth. Smaller nations, stateless peoples, resistance movements, they don't get lasting guarantees. They get temporary arrangements. They get promises until they're inconvenient. And then, just like that, the pipeline shuts off. The borders close, and they're on their own again. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the Shadow Diplomacy Club. So let's talk about it. Do you think alliances like this can ever be sustainable? Or are they always destined to implode when the next deal comes along? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe if you're into these deep dives, and share the video with someone who still thinks international relations are about trust. Because, in the real world, trust is a luxury. Survival is the goal.